experienced just in the last few hours the worst mass shooting in its history. At least 50 people are dead, 53 more injured, many of those critically so. It took place at Pulse Nightclub in Orlando, a popular gay nightclub. The shooting began at about 2 o'clock local time. Eventually, 3 hours later, at 5 o'clock or sometime thereafter, a gunfight ensued when the SWAT team stormed the shooter. The gunman has now been identified as Omar Mateen, born in 1986 in New York, lived in Port St. Lucie, Florida. Authorities are investigating whether or not he had radical influences. Officials do say this is being investigated as a domestic act of terror. Pete Williams has been all over this story for us this morning. Pete, I understand you have some new information.
Well, a couple of things here, Willie. One is there had been some suggestion early on that Mateen, the gunman, had explosives with him when he entered the nightclub. Frankly, we've heard conflicting information on that. I think the main point here to make is that we've heard no confirmation that they did, in fact, find explosives. Some officials say that search isn't done yet. Others say that no explosives were found. I think the best way to say it is there's no confirmation that there were explosives, and it may turn out that there weren't. I think there was initial thinking that perhaps he was wearing an explosive vest, but it may turn out that that was a more of a bulletproof type vest, and we're still waiting to hear about that. Secondly, the authorities have said he had two weapons, a handgun and an AR-15 style assault weapon. We have now been told that he had high-capacity magazines, or clips, if you will. These are the devices that you attach to the weapon that hold the rounds. Florida has no law restricting the size of capacity magazines for these weapons, and there is no federal restriction on it either. So all the indications we have at this point is that the weapons were legally obtained, because we don't know of any disqualifying fact in Mateen's background, but we're also told that the trace of the weapons is either not started yet or just now getting underway, and that's going to take some time to figure out where and when he acquired these weapons. Did he buy them himself? Did somebody else buy them for him? What was how were they acquired? And that's going to be something that will be worked out here. Now, I think very importantly, one of our NBC News producers contacted Mateen's father in Florida a couple of hours ago, who had quite a lot to say, saying, first of all, he wanted everyone to know that the family is shocked by this and that they apologize and they think this is terrible. They had no sign this was coming. But as for motive, he says that he can only speculate and thinks that it goes back a couple of months ago to when he, the father, Mateen, the son, and Mateen's son, young son, were in Miami, and according to the father, saw men kissing, touching each other. This outraged Mateen. He said to his father, "They're doing this in front of me and my son." And his father thinks that this, in other words, is what touched this off, that this was some kind of anti-gay hate crime. But the question, of course, is, was that all there is? Was something else in his past that led Mateen up to this point? We do know that the FBI looked at him in some way 3 years ago, that he was on some kind of watch list. And what we believe is he was on that watch list or was being looked at because the FBI was interested in other people with whom Mateen had been in contact. Not so much a focus on him, but on someone else, and he was in their orbit. That's the information that we have, and that's something that we're told by investigators here just within the past couple of minutes, that they still haven't decided whether this is a hate crime, an act of domestic terrorism, or what. While I've been talking here, Willie, I'm now told that the president apparently is going to make a statement in about an hour and a half at about 1:30 Eastern Time.
Yeah, we've just learned that as well, Pete. The president will be in the briefing room in about 90 minutes from right now. I think we've got Jim Milkoszewski at the White House. Mick, are you there? Mick, can you hear me? It's Willie.
What?
I don't think we don't have Jim Milkoszewski tune in. Let me go back to Pete Williams. I think an important distinction you just made there, Pete, is that yes, he was in a database, Omar Mateen, but not the subject of any direct investigation. He may have been peripherally related to someone else they were looking at. Is that fair to say?
Well, that's the initial word we had. You may think back the initial press conference this morning, this initial statement, the first public statement by officials was at about 7 o'clock this morning, and they were pretty quick to say that they were looking at possible Islamic influences in Mateen's past, and the fact that they were able to say that so quickly is a reflection of the fact that he was in some kind of watch list or some kind of database. But that's all they knew at that point, and of course, it's going to take a long time now to try to figure out precisely what his motives and movements were that led up to this, why that place, why Orlando, all those questions to be answered.
All right, Pete Williams, thanks so much. We'll be back to you shortly. Let's try again with Jim Miklaszewski outside the White House. Mick, good morning.
Good morning, Willie. You know, it was hours ago now that the White House issued a statement that the president had been briefed early this morning on the mass shooting, that tragic shooting there in Orlando, and that he had taken some initial steps. In other words, ordering the FBI and all appropriate agencies to provide whatever assistance they could in terms of the investigation and that process, but also offering some relief, some kind of relief to the community and those families who are so stricken by this mass shooting there in Orlando. We have yet to hear from the president himself. It's not certain. We have no indication that he plans to make a public statement or even issue a written statement of some kind. And one would suspect that perhaps he's waiting until all the details are in, until he has a firm idea of what investigators believe happened here. After all, we're hearing a couple of different versions now about this may have been a crime instigated by the shooter opposition to gays and lesbians, or could it be that he has some foreign ties given his Afghanistan heritage? So all of that has yet to be worked out, and I'm sure that the president doesn't want to get ahead of the investigators, but there are people here who anticipate that since this is the worst mass shooting in U.S. history, that we would in fact hear the president in some manner sometime today.
All right, and we'll be looking for that from the briefing room in less than 90 minutes. Mick, thanks so much. Gabe Gutierrez has been on the scene in Orlando all morning long for us. Gabe, what's the latest down there?
Hi there, Willie. Well, authorities have just released part of the scene, or at least have allowed the media and bystanders to get just a bit closer to the scene, which is about a block and a half from me. The perimeter had been sealed off throughout the morning, but as a police chief said during that briefing, they have now been able to go through the scene, process it, and detect that there were no explosives found in that scene. However, the processing of the nightclub will continue for a long time to come. It was clear that the magnitude of this is really sinking in, even with investigators, with that death toll climbing from 20 people dead earlier this morning. In that first briefing we heard around 7 o'clock, and then the last briefing we heard that death toll climbing to 50 people. So again, the investigation right now into what the motive is, as you mentioned, Pete, reporting that this suspect, his father says that it could have been possible that perhaps some of the motivation may have been that he saw this couple kissing in Miami several months ago. But again, authorities have not confirmed whether it could be that, whether this is being investigated as part of a larger threat. So right now here at the scene, it is still a very active scene behind me. Witnesses have been telling us that that it was extremely chaotic, a lot of confusion among family members. 50 families, again, are waiting for word. There has been a center set up for those families to go to if they need more information. And again, as we have seen from previous reports, people are lining up here in Orlando to donate blood. Again, at least 53 people injured here. So that suspect found with that assault-style type rifle, that handgun as well. And then there's the question of that suspicious device that he was found. As Pete also mentioned, we have had no confirmation from authorities whether that was indeed an explosive device. All authorities have said that it was some sort of suspicious device. And throughout the morning, we have been seeing a robot, the explosive detecting robot here on the scene. And we've seen that through aerial pictures as well. So again, authorities here have opened up at least part of the perimeter within the last few minutes, but they are still processing this very large, complex investigation at this nightclub where at least 50 people have been killed, 53 others have been wounded, the largest mass shooting in U.S. history.
Yeah,
Willie?
Gabe, and you mentioned that NBC News did get in touch with Omar Mateen's father, who gave his assessment of the situation. You laid it out pretty well, which is that he'd seen two men kissing in Miami. That's the father's opinion. That's one thing he saw, and probably one piece of the puzzle that law enforcement is looking at. The other side of this, we have the investigation on one side, but the side we're thinking about is the human side of it. You had 300 some people, according to police. 320 was the number they put out earlier today that were in that nightclub last night, out for a Saturday night, having a good time, when at 2 o'clock in the morning, these shots rang out. Some of them, the witnesses you spoke to too, Gabe, said they thought it was part of the music. They thought it was a new song with loud volume. It turned out, obviously, to be something much worse and something much more horrific. But there are many stories like his. We'll hear a bouncer, apparently, we're reading now from some eyewitnesses, knocked down a partition between the club area and a staff-only, employee-only area, and allowed some people to flee out the back door. There will be stories of survival amidst the 50 deaths that we've seen in Orlando.
Yeah, that's certainly right, Willie. And a lot of people are pointing to that law enforcement officer, that uniformed officer who was working security at the club, and he engaged the suspect. And during that news conference, the authorities there said that he, could have potentially saved more lives despite the high death toll here. So certainly stories of survival, stories of heroism. Some of the witnesses that we've spoken to say once they realized that it was gunshots going, the gunshots were happening at that nightclub, they just dropped to the floor and had to crawl out. Some of them had to tend to the injured. We spoke with one man, Christopher Hansen, who took off his bandana and tried to assist this person who had a gunshot wound. And at this point, he still doesn't know what became of that person, whether he survived. Another mother who was here at the perimeter, she was frantically trying to get a hold of her son who was in that nightclub. She could not get a hold of him. So again, this is the emotion of this scene. People are still trying to figure out what happens to their loved ones. Again, some of them are streaming to a location that's been set up for family members, and also throughout the morning, to give you a sense of the scale of this investigation, the scale of what Orlando PD detectives have to go through. They actually had to bus some of the witnesses to the police department to get their information. So certainly this investigation will be going on for quite some time, and we're also starting to hear much more from those eyewitnesses at the scene who describe a horrifying tragedy. Willie?
All right, Gabe, we'll give you a break, let you go do some more reporting. I want to bring in now Jim Cavanaugh. He's an NBC News law enforcement expert. He's been watching this all morning long with us. Jim, good to have you back in the conversation. Law enforcement talked about the hostage situation that took place inside Pulse nightclub from 2 a.m. to about 5 a.m. before they decided to send SWAT in. And we just learned in that most recent press conference that there was communication between law enforcement and Omar Mateen, the shooter who was inside. What would those conversations have been like based on your experience?
Well, usually they start off very simple, like, what's your name? What's the first name of the negotiator? Let's slow everything down. Let's work this out. If, in fact, they are talking to Mateen, sometimes they'll only let them talk to other hostages there, and then the assailant, Mateen, could relay, say, tell the police to get back, tell the police to get out. So if they're having a direct conversation, Willie, direct on the phone, cell phone to cell phone, they're trying to calm it down and make sure killing's not going on. And all the time they're doing that, they're trying to get in place so they can, apprehend him. So it's simple. I'm Jim, you're Omar. Look, we got to stop. Why are you doing this? Let's slow this thing down. How many people are in there? Who's in there with you? Just kind of a gentle conversation. You got to drop the emotional level to try to get some reasoning into the person's mind. But it's very difficult. Imagine a person who has just killed 50 people. So it's very, very difficult to have a negotiation, and it probably broke down or did not prove very fruitful. They might have got a little time to get their SWAT operators in place, but probably not much, and they had to make a move.
Yeah, and police at the news conference were not able to make a distinction of how many people had already been killed before the hostage standoff took place. Were all 50 already dead during the hostage situation? They didn't quite know or didn't want to say yet. I know how difficult this call is, but what is the distinction? What is the point at which law enforcement says, this guy has already killed a bunch of people, he's likely to kill more, we need to go in and take him out?
Yeah, it's the key, it's the sine qua non, I say, or the essential element of the on-scene commander who has to read the escalation and de-escalation of the event. Issues like the assailant will not communicate directly with the negotiator is not a sign of de-escalation. If he will talk with the negotiator, if they can establish a rapport, if they can call each other by the name, if he can say what he wants, if we can slow things down, there's a little bit of de-escalation there. And also, is he shooting his gun in there? Is he saying, I'm going to kill a hostage in 5 minutes? Is he acting completely erratically? All these little tips and things, Willie, that the on-scene commander, think of the on-scene commander, the way this works, it sits there like a triad. There's the on-scene commander, the way we did it, sits on one side of the desk. If you're the commander sitting there, across from you is the chief negotiator and the tactical supervisor. And it's like a triangle. And the chief negotiator and the tactical supervisor are given intelligence. You have an intelligence officer as well. What are the long rifle teams seeing? What are the SWAT operators seeing? What's negotiators hearing? What are the people calling in telling us? And we're making a decision right here at a table or on the street. And we're running the thing from this tactical command post on scene. And we're making those decisions right there. That's the right place where they're made. They don't go up to the chief, or they don't go up to the sheriff or to Washington. They're made right there by the on-scene commander. And when they read that there's escalation and time is ticking against people's lives in there, they make a decision to go.
You've sort of anticipated my next question. I know you don't have firsthand knowledge of what those conversations were like between law enforcement and Mateen last night, but what is the kind of thing that would trigger the order to send SWAT in after 3 hours?
Yeah, his erratic actions, his failure to engage with the negotiators, no good signs of de-escalation. Maybe some signs of escalation. He could be appearing at the windows with the rifle pointed out and acting erratically. And also the calls from the 15 people inside in the bathroom, Willie, who are calling the police and saying we're trapped in the bathroom. That weighs heavily on the tactical commander's decision, because if this guy starts shooting, even everybody he has in a room, he could make it across and shoot all those other 15 people too. So they have to decide, we got to make a move here. And of course, it turned out to be the right decision, but unfortunately, you already had 100 people shot, 103 people shot. And, you know, how that happened, you know, did anybody get shot after the negotiations began? We don't know. We don't know how, when, and where, and that's what the investigation will find out.
All right, Jim Kavanaugh, we're lucky to have your perspective today. Stick with us. I'm sure we'll be back with you. We want to bring in now Joshua McGill. He was a witness to the shooting and helped rescue people last night. Joshua, we appreciate you taking some time on this horrible day for you. Tell me where you were when the shooting started.
Two roommates and I were in the very corner of the main bar near the patio exit. So it's like basically there's an outdoor bar, and we were kind of next to the door leading to the out. When the shooter happened, we didn't see anything, and we didn't really think it was a shooting at first because we didn't see, no one seemed to really be frantic. But then we still all kind of ducked in a loud noise. But we crept outside to the back patio area, gathered our thoughts, and then we heard a couple more gunshots, and that's when we saw people running, saying, you know, there's a gun, there's a shooter, and then people are hopping over the back patio fence to run away. At this time, there's police already setting up perimeters for like safe zones, etc. My roommates and I actually originally ran into the Pulse employee area, which was like a back door, and we were kind of hiding out in there, and then we heard shooting get closer from inside, so we ran back out, and that's when we hopped the fence. When we hopped the fence, my two roommates bolted. I was still a little staggering because it was a high fence for me to, you know, jump over. During my run across the parking lot, I did hear some more shooting, and it kind of frightened me. So my first instinct was to jump behind a car and duck. During that process is when I just decided to crawl under the car, and I just waited it out. Once the shooting got further from what it sounded like, I, you know, kind of gave a peek around and crawled out. that's when I noticed, I guess, another club goer. He was kind of staggering. I noticed he was covered in blood, and I kind of like crept over to him and then was like, "Hey, I'm here to help you. What's going on?" We crept back, hid behind the car. He was like, "I think I got shot," and it did turn out he got shot once in one arm and once again in the other arm. My first instinct was, we got to stop the bleeding man and get you to the hospital or get you to the nearest police officer. And so I took my shirt off and then tied it around his first arm to stop the bleeding. And then I asked if I can have his shirt so I can tie it around his other arm. And then he then went ahead to complain of a pain on his back, and it turned out he got shot again on his back. So I was like, we got to get you to a safe zone and then to the hospital to control this bleeding, et cetera. So we did that, and then we kind of like dodged and weaved through the parking lot, got to the safe zone. The officer told us to stay down. Another standby person was just, kind of ducking over across the street. I was like, "Hey, I need another shirt because he has another open wound. I need to apply pressure." At that point, the officer was like, "We're going to escort you guys to the ER through a police car." He's like, he's like, "I want you to lay down, and then I want to throw him on top of you so that way I can kind of bear hug him and make sure everything's like tightened so he doesn't bleed out as much." During the rush over to the ER, the police officers were just basically like, "Keep him conscious, keep talking to him." So that's how I got his name. I was like, "Hey, what's your name? You're going to be okay." I'm Josh. He was like, "I'm Rodney." I was like, "Where are you from? How old are you?" He's like, 27, Jacksonville, Florida. I was like, "Any siblings? Who do you live with?" He's like, "My brother." And I, told him I'm from Mississippi originally. I'm 26, et cetera. I told him, well, everything's going to be okay. And that, like, we're almost to the ER. I told him, I was like, "I'm not sure if you're religious or not, but I want to say a prayer for you and make sure that you're okay." And then I'm not sure if his mumbling was a prayer or not, or if he was just delusional, but we got to the ER pretty quick. I helped them get him out of the car and onto a stretcher, and that was that. I waited around forever at the hospital. They wouldn't give me any information. I didn't even know his last name last night at all. It turns out that my Facebook post has gone viral, and it turns out one of his friends that he was with commented, and I reached out to them. I got his last name. It is Sumter, Sumter. And then they got in touch with his family, and they gave me an update that, yes, he was shot, and yes, he is stable. So that's as far as I know, is that he is fine. So I hope he stays fine and stays in a stable state, and that he comes out, quickly.
My gosh, Josh, you saved his life. You saved that man's life. Paint the picture for me in that police car. Were you were grasping him to stop the bleeding?
Yeah, it was kind of like we're both laying on the back of the police car. There's blood all over it. He basically, his arms are tied with 2 T-shirts, and then I'm like bear hugging him to stop the bleeding with the other shirt on his back. And I'm just like, talking to him and, kind of like rocking him a little bit to keep him conscious. And the more I talked to him, he was pretty responsive. Like, he gave me his name. I didn't really get into detail because the hospital was maybe 5 minutes away, if that. So it was really brief, and we got there as quick as possible.
Josh, where do these instincts come from? I think a lot of people would have just run for their lives and tried to save themselves, but you stopped. You saw a man staggering with 3 gunshot wounds and decided to save his life last night.
I'm not really sure. Maybe it was just an adrenaline rush in the moment. Everyone has a fight or flight in them. I definitely did flight at first when I jumped the fence and ran for it, but during the process, I heard more gunshots, so I hid. And then I don't know if it was meant to be for me to be there and hide, but I do have a passion for medical. I am a nursing student. I do have some CPR training, so I kind of knew stopping the bleeding was the main goal. And so I definitely, kicked it into like high gear with the adrenaline rush going and everything. It didn't really faze me at the time until I saw him get rushed into the hospital. That's when I had my breakdown. And then I just kind of like got it together after that.
What do you mean you had your breakdown? What happened?
I think the adrenaline rush wore off, and then I realized that there was a shooting and that I was covered in blood, and it was kind of scary. So I have a panic attack disorder, so I actually started having one, and they had to, sit me down and tell me breathe easy and take deep breaths. So I eventually calmed down and whatnot. So it wasn't horrible. I didn't like have a total freak out, but it was just kind of like a slap in the face, like, wow, this really just all happened.
God bless you, Josh. You saved his life last night. How are your friends doing? You said you were there with 2 roommates. Were they injured at all in the shooting?
Not at all. They actually hopped over, ran for it. They got into the safe ground. They actually thought something happened to me because I wasn't behind them any longer. That's because I was hiding. And once they got past the police perimeter, no one was allowed to go back into the war zone over there. So, but I did, once I got to the hospital and kind of cleaned the blood off, I called them and let them know that I helped someone and that I'm admitted into the hospital just because I did help rescue him and bring him to the hospital. They needed my witness statement, so I had to stay there and give written and verbal ones all until like 7 a.m. this morning.
We're about 10 and a half hours after this shooting started at 2 o'clock in the morning in the club where you were when you made your dash for your life. Have you heard other stories from people inside, people who may have been injured, people who may have escaped?
One of the bartenders I know got shot in the leg. He's actually on footage with one of our news teams. Another one heard was injured but not shot. As far as anything I've heard through social media, there were a few of the performers that were climbing through the air ventilation system to escape through the AC unit.
Wow.
I did hear that there was about at least 15 people barricaded in a bathroom with the door held shut. As far as anything else, I'm not really sure. It's all hearsay right now. But that's as far as I know on anything else.
But did I hear you right? You said some people inside the club climbed out through air ducts. Did they make it out?
Yes, they did make it out.
And when you heard the shooting begin, obviously your brain doesn't go there right away because, my God, how could it? You can't imagine you're being shot at in a nightclub when you're having a good time. What did it register as at first, and then when did you realize this was something much worse?
At first, it was like a bam, bam, bam. So we thought maybe there was like sound difficulties with the speakers. Maybe a speaker blew. Maybe someone was being a jokester and lit off a firecracker. I'm not sure. We did kind of do like, a little head duck because we didn't know what it was. And then it didn't register until we snuck outside just to like kind of be in a safer zone when we heard more of the bam, bam, and then that's when we saw people running and jumping the fence and saying someone has a gun, there's a shooting, and that's when it kind of was like, oh, wow.
It's an incredible story, Josh. We're so grateful, given all you've been through in the last few hours, that you would stop and take some time and share your story and your heroism. Again, you saved a man's life last night. Thank you for that, and thank you for being with us.
Yes, sir, not a problem. Thank you.
Florida officials doing another press briefing right now, including with Governor Scott. Let's listen in.
So this is clearly an act of terrorism. It's sickening. It should make every American angry. This would ever happen anywhere in our country. The first thing you think about is you just can't imagine what these families are going through. The families are still waiting to find out what happened to their loved ones. The most important thing we can do right now, as law enforcement is doing their job, and our healthcare workers are doing everything they can for the victims, is pray for everybody. Thank God we have the law enforcement we have. at the state, the Orange County Police Department, the Sheriff's Department, FDLE, all the federal agencies, everybody's coordinated their activities very well. It's heroic, the individuals that went into the building knowing there. It's heroic, the individuals that went into the building knowing there was an active shooter. So we need to be very thankful that there are individuals that are willing to risk their lives to save other lives, and they clearly saved other lives. For anybody that thinks that they should do this, I can tell you the state of Florida, the local law enforcement, will be swift in their justice. We have great law enforcement in our state, and they're going to always do the right thing. I declared a state of emergency for Orange County. We're going to provide all the resources that anyone needs. But I can tell you, everybody's going to work together, and that's one thing great about our state, Orlando, Orange County, and I want to thank all the federal agencies for all their support. But right now, hearts and prayers go out to everybody that's been impacted this. I can't imagine a family member that is still waiting to find out what happened to their loved one. It has to be heart-wrenching. I know the state attorney wanted to say something. Jeff, did you want to sit there? Thank you.
I just want to thank the governor for coming down to join us. This is a terrible, terrible, evil act. As a father of 7, I called and checked on some of my kids this morning to make sure they were okay. We're doing everything we can. Law enforcement is working well together. Our victim advocates are helping out to see if we can help with families. And I just encourage everyone, as I did my staff, to please donate blood because we're going to need a lot of it. And I want to thank our local law enforcement officers for the amazing job they've been doing. Thank you, sir.
I'd be glad to take any questions. Excuse me just for a second. The law enforcement's already said when the mayors have said when they're going to have another press conference, they'll provide more information. There's a lot of unanswered questions, and at that time they'll be able to answer the questions.
Governor Scott, was the suspect someone that was on your radar beforehand? Were authorities in Florida aware of this suspect and any bad activity came out?
I know there's a later press conference. Law enforcement will answer all those questions.
You think this is an act of terrorism? Can you just define why? What makes this an act of terrorism?
Well, this is clearly an act of terror. This is, I mean, you just can't imagine this would happen to our community, our state, or anywhere in our country. But for somebody to go in there and be an active shooter and take that number of lives, any life, but that number of lives and injure that many people is clearly an act of terror.
Governor, will this event make you change your views and put you back into kind of gun legislation or restrictions on gun purchases and anything like that?
Right now, this is the time to find out exactly what happened. It's a time to pray for those that have been that have lost their families, that have lost their lives. Pray for the victims. There's going to be plenty of time to deal with, how our society comes together. But I can tell you, the Orlando area, the Orange County, the state of Florida, we're very resilient. We will come together and do everything we can to help everybody that's been impacted, but also bring this community back together again.
Governor, have you been in contact with the president?
I have not talked to him yet.
Governor, can you talk about the global why initiatives?
Sure.
And what does that mean for the families and their victims?
Sure. We declared a state of emergency to make sure that all the resources that would be necessary for the city and the county would be necessary. Anything that would be needed from the state is available immediately. The head of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, Rick Swearingen, is the coordinating officer, but we worked with the mayors and the sheriffs and the police chief to make sure they have all the resources they need.
How many families of the victims have been contacted?
Law enforcement will answer all those questions. They're having another press conference I think at 1:30.
Governor, do you know how many families of the victims have been contacted at this point?
I know that again, all that will come out as law enforcement will put all that out. But I know they're working hard to reach every family member, and they have victim advocates, as the state attorney said, to take care of all these families. You just can't imagine it happen. I mean, I have daughters, I have grandchildren. I can't imagine this happening to my family. It's devastating. You don't want this to happen anywhere in the world, okay? But You know, I can tell you, law enforcement, our elected officials, the mayors, at the state level, we work coordinate our activities, hoping this would never happen. We work with the federal government, hoping this would never happen. But it's devastating when you see, you see how many people lost their life and just the impact it's going to have on their families. I mean, I've got kids and grandkids. You can't imagine.
Will you be meeting with the families yourself, Governor?
I will meet with the families at the appropriate time. Look what they're going through right now.
Governor Scott, we're hearing that there was some kind of impediments this morning in between communication between the families and the hospital staff due to privacy regulations. The White House has been contacted. What role may you play in trying to help facilitate the families being able to connect with those still in the hospital?
I think, the way I understand, that's been resolved. So.
Is there anything that you can do on a policy level to stop something like this in the future?
Look, we're dealing with a tragedy right now. Our prayers go out to everybody impacted. Law enforcement's doing their job. There will be plenty of time to think about how do we continue to improve our society, and we're going to continue to work on how we do that. Look, we're a resilient state. Bye-bye.
I'll answer you one HIPAA question real quick. So the CEO of the hospital came to me and said they had an issue related to the families that had come to the emergency room. Because of HIPAA regulations, they could not give them any information. So I reached out to the White House to see if we could get the HIPAA regulations waived. White House responded through appropriate channels to waive those so that the hospital could communicate with the families that were there. I don't know. I think the majority of them have been. We have not identified the victims that are still in the nightclub, but I believe that the ones that have been transported to the hospital and are deceased have been identified. Thank you. I have spoken with the president, the governor. Everybody has lent their support to this. The president offered any resources that the federal government could possibly provide. The FBI has just been tremendous. The FDLE has been tremendous. So we have no complaints about our state partners and our federal partners and their help. Thank you.
When you talk about the things that you need from the federal government, what are some of those things that you need immediately right now?
Well, the waiving of the HIPAA laws so that the doctors and healthcare personnel can communicate with family members was probably the most important, but we've got on the ground what we need from the federal government right now, which is the FBI and all of their resources and the coordination with FDLE and OPD. So there's not too much more than I could ask of them. They were here immediately in response. They've done a lot of research into the shooter that they'll be prepared, I think, to update you on. The next press conference is probably going to be around 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, you've been watching a press conference with Florida officials, including Governor Rick Scott and Orlando Mayor Buddy Dyer. This is a live picture now of the Pulse nightclub in South Orlando. If you're just joining us, about 2 o'clock this morning, local time, shots rang out when Omar Mateen, a 29-year-old man from Port St. Lucie, Florida, walked in to the popular gay club with an AR-15 assault-style rifle and a handgun and started shooting. He was immediately encountered by a uniformed Orlando police officer who was working security at the club. They exchanged gunfire. That led to a 3-hour hostage standoff, at which point, 5 o'clock in the morning, East Coast time, the SWAT team was sent in. Omar Mateen was killed, but not before 50 people died inside the club. 53 more were injured. Carlos Rosario was at Pulse nightclub last night. Out on the back patio, we're told, when he heard about 20 rounds of gunfire. He also says the only reason he's still alive is because he was on that patio, and he's been generous enough to spend some time with us right now. Carlos, I'm so glad you're here talking with us right now. Tell us what you saw and heard last night.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you for having me on, and I also want to send my condolences to the families that lost so many lives today and for those that are injured. But to get back to the patio, I actually was inside in the main dance floor. I actually was getting ready to order a cocktail or a drink, but I felt like it was a little too packed inside, so I actually walked out to the patio where there was less people so I can be able to order my last drink. And as I was putting my order in, I was leaning over the counter talking to one of my best bartenders, Holly, and that's when the first 20 to 30 rounds went off. The first 2 rounds, when it went off, everybody really didn't move because they thought it was part of the music because the music was so loud. And then when it kept on going, I think everybody's instinct went to this is not music. These are gunshots. And that's when everyone on the main dance floor just started running out of Pulse through an emergency exit. I mean, it was like something off of a movie. Everybody was falling on each other. It was very hard. People were trying to help other people get out. While I was out, when we already got outside of the patio, I made it out, and then I found this young gentleman. He was about 27 or so. His name was Junior. He threw himself on me, and he just asked me to save him. I didn't, at that time, wasn't registering everything because I was just so in shock. And when he fell to the floor on his stomach, I realized he was hit. He had a gunshot wound to his back. And I am a medical assistant. I've been in the field for about 2 years now. I also worked at a cardiovascular specialist, so I knew the importance of making sure he doesn't bleed out, making sure that he's conscious and still alert, so that when the ambulance people come, they will be able to take care of him and get him started. I held pressure on his wound for about 20 minutes or so, and still, checking in with him, keeping him conscious. Thank God a paramedic got there on time and, pulled out the gentleman and was able to put him on the stretcher and send him out to the ambulance. Once when I thought the ghost was clear, I kept walking, and I honestly feel like I was there for a reason. A second young lady threw herself on me again, and she had a gunshot wound to the right hand on the forearm. And the only thing that she asked for, she wasn't asking for help. She wasn't asking for anything. All she was asking was to call her mother. She had lost her phone from running so fast. She just left everything and tried to get out. That she didn't have her phone, and she just wanted to speak with her mom. She was turning very, very pale, and I got very worried. So my first initial reaction was first to stabilize her, make sure she's okay, lay her down, and then continue on with getting the conversation with her mom. I can honestly say the conversation between a mom and a daughter in such a devastation moment, it was the most hardest thing I've ever experienced in my life.
Carlos, can you share any of what that conversation was like?
Yes, it was the most beautiful conversation I heard before. She was just telling her mom how much she loved her. She was just explaining on the top of her lungs, just letting her mom know the love that she had for her. And it was so heartbreaking because even though she was getting those messages, I didn't want her to give up, and I didn't want her mom to give up on her. Like, I didn't want them to say their last goodbye because I felt like that was what's going to come next. So I sprung into action, and I took the phone, and I immediately just told the mom, I'm gonna help her. I'm gonna get her through this, and I want you to stay with me. I want both of you guys to stay with me. And they were both talking back and forth. I was trying to make small talk in between the conversations to get their mind off of it. And we were trying to get a paramedic to our side, but because it was closed off, we actually had to lift her up. It was me and 4 other people, and walk maybe half of a mile down to the next ambulance to be able to go get her medical attention. Because at that time, my goal was to make sure that a mother would be able to see her daughter another day.
Good for you, Carlos. You said she was shot in the hand. Was she hit anywhere else? How critical was her condition at that point?
Her condition was stable. I can honestly say it was not a fatal wound. It was towards the arm. The person that I was really, truly worried the most was Junior, because he did get shot in his back, and there's a lot of vital organs there, and it was just a little scary making sure that, he stayed with me the whole time.
Have you heard any update on Junior's condition?
I have not, and I actually look forward to, hopefully I'm going to be researching and looking to see where he's at. I would definitely love to meet him again and see how he's doing, and hopefully he's doing great.
Carlos, I'll say to you what we said to Josh, who we talked to a few minutes ago. You're a hero. You stabilized two people and maybe saved their lives. What was that instinct for you? Same thing I asked Josh. What kicked in those moments that didn't cause you to run for your own life, but to stop and save a couple others?
What came through my mind is I actually had a moment where I paused and I said, if I was shot, where would I look for help for? Who would I be able to depend on? And it hit home, and I said, you know what? I believe in God. I have a very huge faith in God, and I know that I made it out there alive for a reason. And I said, I'm not going to take this for granted. I'm going to put in work and help those around me to get better, because I'm good. I'm fine. But the people around me, definitely, I did. I was 100% willing to give my all just to make sure that everyone's family can be able to receive their child back home and still continue their lives, you know?
Well, I have a feeling you'll be hearing from her and her mom again very soon. People you were with in the club, Carlos, anyone else that you know, any friends that were hit or injured last night?
Yes, I was actually with one of my friends. His name is Isaiah. His mom is an amazing person. She's so full of spirit. She loves going out with us. She's like the mom of the group and like hanging out with us. And while the shooting was happening, unfortunately, she was inside, located with her son. And the first instinct that she had when the gunshots went off were just, to get on the floor, lay down. But you can only do so much with what you have at that time. And she ended up, getting a shot, a really big shot to her hand and her leg. And that was the most serious point, because I was speaking with her a couple of minutes before that, laughing and smiling. And it just shows you that one day you can be here, and 20 seconds later you might not.
Carlos, did you get any glimpse of the shooter as he began shooting, or were you too busy fleeing the sound of gunfire?
I honestly will say I was fleeing from the gunshot sounds. I really didn't want to take time to about the shooter. I would have had, a concealed weapon. Like, I just would have tried my best to, but I felt like him would be the opposite of help. I wanted to help everybody. I wanted everybody to get out.
And you did your best. That was a building full of heroes last night, and Carlos Rosario, you're one of them. Thank you so much for taking the time with us, and thank you for what you did inside that club last night.
No, I definitely don't want to take all the praise. I definitely believe everybody is here for a reason. We all got to take our life and just think about the good things and just keep moving forward. And the condolences again to all those families. I am so sorry for everything that happened. This is a horrible day, but I know that we'll get through this eventually, and we're going to come out bigger and tougher at the end. We're going to all come as a community and be able to make this an awareness and hopefully something change.
Well, you and others were rays of light in all that darkness last night, Carlos. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Let's turn now to Sean Henry. He's a former top official with the FBI. He's now an NBC News analyst and the president of CrowdStrike Services. Sean, this is the first we've spoken to you. You've had some time to absorb it all. We're almost 11 hours since the first shots were fired at 2 o'clock in the morning Eastern time at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. What's your assessment based on everything you've heard so far?
Hi, Willie. Like everybody else, just kind of watching and taking in all of the activity here and trying to answer a lot of questions. I'm thinking about, as an FBI official, the types of things that law enforcement on the ground, the first responders, the local PD there, as well as other federal officials are considering. And I know that there's a question immediately about what the motivation is here. There's been some speculation this is terrorism. From what I've heard from the FBI, some of the officials who've gone public, it appears that there may have been some connectivity on social media. But this is very, very early in the investigation. It's going to take some time. But the agents there, law enforcement, are absolutely right now, as we speak, they're exploiting social media. They're looking at the individual that they've identified thus far, whether he's a lone shooter or there might be others. They're trying to understand if there's a larger web of individuals who may be involved. And as they start to collect and gather this information, this intelligence by the social media footprint, coordination with foreign intelligence services to the extent that there are any, and looking at, they'll start to execute search warrants on his residence and his vehicle to try and collect and gather anything that might go towards the motivation here. It is early on. They're absolutely looking at this as terrorism. That's an initial leaning in a situation like this. When you look at the totality of the circumstances, the ultimate motivation will be determined as this investigation continues, Willie.
As you know, Sean, terrorism is an awfully big category. It can be all kinds of terrorism. Obviously, if you take 50 lives, that's an act of terrorism. What specifically do you think the FBI means by terrorism right now? Domestic terrorism, some link to international terrorism?
Yeah, so when the FBI talks about domestic terrorism versus international terrorism, it really is what the inspiration is. If it's tied to an international organization like Al-Qaeda or ISIS, then the Bureau considers that international terrorism. When they talk about domestic terrorism, they're talking about domestic-based groups. Somebody like the KKK or an organization such as that is based domestically. That's how the Bureau will categorize that. In the course of this investigation, they'll be looking at all the ties they can to what may have inspired him to do this. What was the motivation? And as they start to connect those links, then they will train their resources on opportunities to collect the best intelligence to provide a much fuller understanding of this incident, Willie.
Sean, pull back the curtain a little bit for our viewers. What kind of communications are happening around the world right now between United States law enforcement officials and law enforcement in neighboring countries, places that we have relationships with? What is happening right now? What are they looking at specifically?
Well, as we've talked before, the FBI has legal attachés that are stationed in U.S. embassies around the globe. There are more than 70 offices and agents that are stationed there physically, and their specific job day in and day out is to work and coordinate with foreign intelligence agencies, foreign law enforcement agencies, in a situation where there may be U.S. interests at stake, and those foreign services have intelligence that's of value to the FBI here. That's a two-way street. The FBI certainly was sharing intelligence that they had in Paris and in Brussels a few months ago with the attacks there. So the coordination and the ability for the global intelligence services to come together and look for any shred of evidence, any bit of information that might highlight and shed light on the motivation for this attack, and most importantly right now, Willie, any other connected attacks. What we saw previously in Europe, in Brussels and France, in those cases, there were other attacks that had been planned. Again, not clear here that this is directly tied to terrorism, but without a doubt, law enforcement is looking forward, trying to be proactive, collecting intelligence to help them disrupt any other potential attacks that may be in place, Willie.
It's still too early to say for sure, but there's certainly a lot of pieces starting to come together. Sean Henry bringing his FBI experience to bear. Thanks so much, Sean. I'm sure we'll be back to you a bit later. NBC News spoke with Omar Mateen's father, Mir Sadiq, just a few hours ago. Some of what he had to say in a statement was, "We are saying we are apologizing for the whole incident. We weren't aware of any action he's taking. We are in shock, like the whole country. This had nothing to do with religion." End of quote from Mateen's father. But his father does go on to say that he claims his son got very angry recently when he saw two men kissing in downtown Miami a couple of months ago, and he thinks that may have causes. He said this: "We were in downtown Miami, Bayside. People were playing music. He saw two men kissing each other in front of his wife and kid, and he got very angry. They were kissing each other and touching each other, and he said, 'Look at that, in front of my son, they're doing that.' Then when we were in the men's bathroom and men were kissing each other." End quote. The father said he did not care, but Omar was very upset. Said, quote, "Now looking back, maybe that's why he went after a gay club." As we've been telling you all morning, the Pulse nightclub, a very popular gay club in Orlando. Let's go back now to Pete Williams. He's been on this story all morning for us. Pete, what's your latest?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, to pick up on what you just said and to resolve this confusion about the fact that the father's last name is Siddiqui and the gunman's last name, according to police, is Mateen. And the reason is that according to court records, Mateen 10 years ago successfully petitioned to change his name. He was born Omar Mir Siddiqui. He changed it to Omar Mir Siddiqui Mateen. Why he did that, what the significance of that is, we don't know. It was 10 years ago. So that tells us that the family has been in Florida for at least 10 years. The law enforcement is now at the home, we're told, where Mateen lived. They're either preparing to search it, waiting for a search warrant, or actually beginning to conduct that search now. That is something you would expect after an incident like this as the investigation into his past begins. One thing that we've also been discovering here from looking at court records is that Mateen had a security guard's license, firearms license. The significance of that is that it would tell us that he was very familiar with firearms because, according to Florida rules, to get that kind of a license, anyone who applies for it and maintains it has to do a certain amount of gun range shooting, has to fire a certain number of rounds, demonstrate proficiency with firearms. So this is someone who was familiar with firearms and familiar with how to use them. Now, whether he fired at the gun range an AR-15 rifle, which is what police say he used in this shooting, we don't know. We've been told by law enforcement that the weapon that they recovered at the scene had high-capacity magazines. These are the clips, if you will, that hold the rounds that attach to the firearm. There's no restriction on high-capacity magazines in Florida, and we're told that the tracing of these weapons is just now beginning. As for what this is, which is the big question here, was this a hate crime based on the comments the father made? Was this an act of terrorism? Was there some layering of the two? In other words, was he sort of predisposed to have strong anti-gay sentiments because of some sort of Islamic religious propaganda? That's something that they're looking into. The initial assessment we had several hours ago from law enforcement was that they knew his name. He had been in the database. They had looked at him a couple of years ago because of people he was associated with, but they didn't see at that point a connection to international terrorists. In other words, they had not found any evidence at that point of someone directing this from overseas. So was he reading social media? Is he reading this propaganda? All those questions are to be answered, Willie.
Just to pick up on your reporting, too, Pete, on that firearms license. It's a Class G firearms license associated with security guards, as you said, requires 28 hours of mandatory classroom and gun range training. He would have had to fire 144 rounds on a range as part of that training and testing. So it goes to your point that this is a man who likely knew what he was doing with a gun in his hand. If you're just joining us now as we come up on the top of the hour, we are covering the worst mass shooting in the history of this country. At least 50 people are dead, according to police in Orlando, Florida. 53 more are injured, many of them critically. It took place at Pulse Nightclub, a popular gay club in Orlando. The shooting began at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning when the man we've been talking about, Omar Mateen, walked to the club. In his possession, he had an AR-15 assault-style rifle, a handgun, and began shooting. He was encountered by a uniformed Orlando police officer who was working as security. He engaged Mateen in a firefight. It didn't end there, though. Mateen continued, and there was a 3-hour hostage standoff. At 5 o'clock in the morning Eastern time there in Orlando, the decision was made to send in the SWAT team, at which point Mateen was killed, but not before taking 50 lives of people out at a nightclub on a Saturday night. Mateen was born in 1986, 29 years old, as Pete said, lived in Port St. Lucie, Florida, a United States citizen born in New York. Authorities are looking into whether or not he had radical influences. Officials say it is being investigated as a domestic act of terror. Over the last hour or so, we've been talking to some eyewitnesses, people who were inside the club as this act of terror, as this horror swept through the club. I spoke with Joshua McGill. He was a witness to the shooting and helped rescue people last night. I began by asking him where he was when the shooting started.
My two roommates and I were in the very corner of the main bar near the patio exit. So it's like basically there's an outdoor bar, and we were kind of next to the door leading to the out. When the shooter happened, We didn't see anything, and we didn't really think it was a shooting at first because we didn't see, no one seemed to really be frantic. But then we still all kind of ducked in a loud noise. But we crept outside to the back patio area, gathered our thoughts, and then we heard a couple more gunshots, and that's when we saw people running, saying, you know, there's a gun, there's a shooter, and then people are hopping over the back patio fence to run away. At this time, there's police already setting up perimeters for like safe zones, etc. My roommates and I actually originally ran into the Pulse employee area, which was like a back door, and we were kind of hiding out in there, and then we heard shooting get closer from inside, so we ran back out, and that's when we hopped the fence. When we hopped the fence, my two roommates bolted. I was still a little staggering because it was a high fence for me to, you know, jump over. During my run across the parking lot, I did hear some more shooting, and it kind of frightened me. So my first instinct was to jump behind a car and duck. During that process is when I just decided to crawl under the car, and I just waited it out. Once the shooting got further from what it sounded like, I, you know, kind of gave a peek around and crawled out. That's when I noticed, I guess, another club goer. He was kind of staggering. I noticed he was covered in blood, and I kind of like crept over to him and then was like, hey, I'm here to help you. What's going on? We crept back, hid behind the car. He was